Mai, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. You know, the Manx people don't like to boast very much about their accomplishments, but before we talk about securing the future, I think it's right to see where we've come from. This is a table based upon the GDP numbers for 2019, the last pre-COVID year. 2022 is not out yet for some countries, so this is comparable. The Isle of Man now has the 4th highest GDP per capita in Europe. It's comparable to Switzerland, and it has the lowest debt to GDP ratio in Europe. And in the KPMG report that the island plan was based on, it highlights that the island's growth for the last 10 years has come from e-gaming and insurance. Fair enough. Does that mean that the Isle of Man's been lucky? No. This success has been very, very long in the making. In 1970 and 1980, the GDP per capita of the Isle of Man was below the UK. In 1990, it was still 12% below the UK. In 2000, it was 19% above the UK. And in 2010, it was 67% above the UK. Now it's double the UK. The island has always grown because of one or two sectors doing well, but in each decade it hasn't been the same sectors. If you'd said to a Manxman in 1965, your tourism and fisheries sectors will collapse, but in 50 years you'll be twice as rich as the UK, he would have said, you're dreaming, fella. But it happened. Remember that thing about whichever way you throw it, it will always stand? That's not luck, that is endurance. Also, this growth has been accomplished without debt. So one way to view the Isle of Man economy is that we have a similar level of public services to the UK in terms of health and pensions and transport and so on. But the UK has borrowed 100% of its GDP to get there, and we've basically borrowed nothing. So the UK has printed up £2.5 trillion of debt for what exactly? It's not obvious. Moreover, since 1980, the island's treasury has always been sailing into the wind. So comparing the Isle of Man to the UK is like comparing a sort of carefully saving aunt that has a very spendthrift nephew that's living next door. This is the Moody's credit rating report on the Isle of Man. You don't have to read it. I can sum it up for you. The Isle of Man's a great place, but you have terrible neighbours. During the last 30 years, the evolution of interest rates has been relentlessly bad for careful savers like the Isle of Man and very good for governments that want to print up money and fund deficits. The German philosopher Hegel said, "The owl of wisdom spreads its wings only with the falling of the dusk." And in other words, what that really means is we only really understand what's been going on at the end of the day when it's really nearly all over and we can see what's been happening. This interest rate chart here is really the chart that has created the modern world. High executive pay, high house prices, footballers' salaries, hedge funds, private equity, sewage in the sea due to the over-leveraging of outfits like Thames Water, and now inflation has all been created by that. And now it's over. So this makes the Isle of Man's performance even more remarkable. Sure, the Isle of Man has benefited from the expansion of financial services, although this has not actually been particularly good for some sectors. But the Manx Treasury, which is the careful saver in the room, has performed despite the monetary climate of over the last 40 years, not because of it. So the Manx people certainly don't need to take any lessons from anyone about how to manage an economy properly. Which brings us to one of the key issues at hand, which is the median salary levels on the island. So to create fiscal resilience, this very high GDP per capita needs somehow to translate into higher value jobs and more high value businesses so that everyone's living standards increases, the tax taken income goes up, and we can afford the public services that we want. And this, by the way, is exactly the same problem as the Republic of Ireland, where a big driver of GDP over there is Apple and Microsoft kind of using Ireland as a tax haven within the EU, but not employing many people. So in fact, the Isle of Man economy, the modern Isle of Man economy, now looks much more like the Irish economy than the British economy. And some of the approaches that the island plan includes, like creating investment reserves, are similar to some of the things that Varadkar is trying to do now in Ireland in terms of making investments to create new businesses and so on. Which brings us to the bear. You may be wondering what the bear is. This is a very old joke, so I'll apologize in advance. So there's two hunters walking through the forest, and one of them sees the bear. And the bear's coming towards them, and he reaches down into his knapsack, and he starts putting his running shoes on. And the other hunter says, "What are you doing? Nobody can ever outrun a bear." And the guy says, "I don't need to outrun the bear. I only need to outrun you." This is really the theme of the rest of this talk, because if we want another 15,000 economically active people, plus businesses and investment to drive up this income flow, to increase salaries and so on, we don't have to build the perfect beast. We just have to be better than the UK, because that's where most of these people and most of these businesses are probably going to come from. So this is what the state finances look like today, based on the audited numbers from last year. So the big numbers are less important, and the small numbers are very important. First, the big number, the pension liability. So this, in a way, is the least important, because first, it's completely theoretical. This is what the island probably might owe its pensioners over the next decades. But because the liability is so long-term, tiny changes in the assumptions can make the liability look bigger or smaller. So, for example, in 21 to 22, the liability shrank by nearly £500 million. If interest rates continue to go up, it'll probably shrink a lot more. And there are various sort of technical solutions to this, like capping it or selling the liability, which is the route that Jersey's taken, for example. And places like Japan have been sort of preparing for a pensions apocalypse for about 30 years, and it never sort of quite seems to arrive. But in any case, these are sort of mind-boggling numbers that much cleverer people than me are sort of thinking about all the time, and how to treat them. On the other hand, small numbers are very important. Specifically, the way that interest compounds over time makes a huge difference. The phrase trader law was probably invented by a Manx economist. Over long time periods, as the island has proven, the cumulative effect of managing the money patiently and cautiously is enormous. The island today has around 2 billion of liquid investments, and in 2022, the investment income from those assets was 79 million, which meant that we were making about 3.7% return on those liquid investments. And the island has always kept a lot of cash and short-term bonds, and interest rates went up by 5% in the last 18 months. So we might well expect that number to be much better in the future as interest rates rise. And the effect of higher interest rates and exactly how you manage the money over time makes huge differences. So if you look at the calculation on the second box there, a 1% difference, so if you go from 3.7% to 4.7% on your liquid investment portfolio, the difference over 10 years is £300 million. Over 20 years, it's £1 billion, and over 30 years, it's £2 billion. So very, very small changes in the way that the investment portfolio and the returns that are generated makes enormous differences. And there's another issue here, which is that, of course, the liquid portfolio is investing in UK government bonds. And every time you invest in the UK government bonds, you're investing in Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer's project. And one of the things about the deficit and the investments that are coming along is that you're investing in your project. And that produces income, so as long as it makes better returns, that should be the right thing to do. And then third, the deficit, which we'll come on to in detail in a moment. Now, when Gordon Brown was Chancellor in the UK, he developed the so-called Golden Rule, which was copied by many other countries, and which said that you should run a balanced budget and only borrow, or in our case, dip into reserves, to finance long-term projects. Then this was amended to it's okay to borrow money to cover shortfalls within the economic cycle. In other words, you borrow to cover gaps when taxes are down, and then you put it back when taxes go up again because people are more employed or more profits are being made. And unfortunately, to quote the famous economist Mae West, he wanted to be Snow White, but then he drifted, because then it was decided not to stick to that rule either. Throw in some wars, financial crisis, COVID, and that's how you get to a 2.5 trillion debt mountain that's sitting across the water. So the reason now why governments everywhere are very worried about deficits is that we're in a period where employment is very high, and yet they're still running deficits. And many other countries, it's not just the UK that's doing that. But when it comes to the Isle of Man deficit, are we really talking about the same thing as the UK? Because we have sort of two things going on here. Because we're tied to sterling, we have the same inflation problems as the UK, which leads to wage and cost rises that's sort of eating into the budget. But also, the Isle of Man has embarked on this national project to create this fiscal resilience by attracting these additional people and high-value businesses. And according to the KPMG study, which we'll look at in a minute, these actions will generate a lot more income without putting up the tax rates. So then we don't have to worry about the deficit, we don't have to worry about the pension liability, because this will somehow resolve itself if we continue to get the growth. So let's take a look at this in a bit more detail. Compared with the minister's numbers, I'm using numbers that are net of the national insurance income, so that's why the numbers are a bit smaller on this slide than they were on the previous presentation. So in the first box, we have an approximation of what it costs to run the Isle of Man from year to year and how much is invested in capital projects. So let's say for a moment we're going to stick with Gordon Brown's golden rule and only dip into the reserves for long-term projects. Within the island plan, we then need to decide what is really driving the plan towards a long-term outcome and what is short-term spending. And that, of course, is very complicated. That is a matter of debate. Some spending is obviously short-term. Clearly, if you're paying somebody unemployment benefit or a pension, that's an investment for today. And clearly, if you decide to build a new power station, the infrastructure end of that graph, that's obviously a long-term project, and there's no disputing it. But in many areas, it's not so obvious. If we invest into education, which is a big budget, about 15% of the budget is education, that's clearly improving the lives of our children today, so it's short-term. But if we're investing into the education system for the long term so that it's better than the UK system, on the principle that we've only got to be better than the UK, that's very much long term. So I think that the island deficit is a bit different from the UK deficit. In the UK, there is no way, however much they spend and throw at the problem, that the UK economy is going to grow by 20 to 30% over the next 10 years. But the Isle of Man is a different story. The bet is that the island plan will deliver this. So any budget debate is really a political debate about who within the island kind of pays for it. But what we can say is that in a situation where over half the costs of the budget are people costs, and where inflation-level wage rises are driving at least some of the deficit, increased costs combined with improvements in the delivery of the various services are obviously going to be quite important. The UK state is forever talking about finding efficiencies in the public sector, in other words, doing more with the same number of people. And of course, it never seems to happen. But historically, delivery improvements like better schools, better health service and so on can and do happen where there's a national will to do so. So maybe the way to think about the deficit is actually as a pure business decision. If we made the assumption a very generous assumption that all of the projected deficit in the Pink Book is resulting from investments that are going to kind of somehow help to deliver the island plan, and that the increased costs will be combined with better service delivery and all that. Is it worth it? Or would we be better off just sort of cutting everything and kind of forget the plan? If you look at this analysis at the bottom, this is the projected deficit in the Pink Book. And what KPMG said was that by 2030, if we deliver the island plan, we're going to have another 92.9 million of tax revenues. I'm ignoring the national insurance number to be conservative for the moment, just focusing on the income tax. Obviously, that income tax uplift, that's a structural uplift, is going to go on forever. So it's not just the 93 million that you get at the end of the 10 years, at the end of the 7 years, right? It's that and on forever. So you could argue that the value of that, well, I've put a very conservative multiple here. I've said like it's worth 6 times that, so it's about 550 million. But you could, you could easily argue that that should be 12 times or 14 times because it's kind of going to go on forever, right? And the rate of return with these extremely conservative assumptions is 11%, which is more than double what the island is earning on its liquid portfolio. So clearly this makes sense. And obviously the debate is really around how much of this is really contributing to the island plan, long-term, continuing to build the island, and how much is just short-term spending. I think it's nuanced. It's not obvious. So finally, can we reduce the deficit and help to deliver the island plan with other people's money, inward investment? So I've spent my career trying to do that in smaller economies, and on large-scale investments, it's possible where there's an alignment between the private sector and the state. I think the first step in thinking about this is to sort of put our prejudices aside. I think we all have it sort of in our heads from the 1970s that the state is basically incompetent as an owner of businesses and that the private sector is by definition better than the state as an owner. That has sort of become a religious principle over time that must be true. But in small jurisdictions, I think that's too simplistic because private capital, first of all, wants very high returns. So private equity, if you want to bring a private equity fund into a business, they're looking for 20% annual returns. Infrastructure funds, the kind of people that used to own the steam packet and now own Manx Gas, their objective is to get a 12% return. These are very high returns. And falling interest rates made it very easy for those guys to make those returns, but they're not going to make them anymore on that basis because interest rates are going up. So whether we like it or not, there is also a big premium for investors investing in small jurisdictions. And small countries anyway are not on the radar screen of big investors, so unless the government actively puts them there. So the government's going to be involved one way or another. Now, the Isle of Man government has only very rarely intervened in the private sector operations, and that's been on the occasions where private finance has basically crashed the car. And so when it had to act, it worked and it stepped in. So in your harbour right now, you have this beautiful ship, the Manxman. Even if that ship never leaves Douglas Harbour again, it's probably worth 20 or 30 million more than it cost to build because there's now a global RoPax ferry shortage. And meanwhile, I might add that the Scottish government has paid double that price for a smaller vessel. More importantly, when any foreigner steps onto that ship, the immediate reaction is going to be, these people aren't joking. This is serious. And I do believe that if the steam packet had been owned privately, that vessel simply wouldn't exist. Modern infrastructure investors really don't think much like the Manx entrepreneurs that built the steam packet in the first place. They probably would have hummed and hawed for 5 years and then concluded that it made economic sense, whatever that means, to go and try and charter a second-hand one. So while most of the inward investment in the island plan is likely to come from smaller businesses or clusters of activity around sectors like cybersecurity, where Isle of Man enterprise is sort of attracting them into the island, there will also be projects where we need private capital so that the state doesn't end up picking up the bill, but where the private sector alone can't deliver what's needed. One area is transport links. Now, the KPMG report commented that air links to Roland's Way are sufficient to satisfy demand. But we also know that air links to the Isle of Man have never really been quite right since the glory days of Manx Airlines. Plus, what if it's the other way around? It's actually the air links, the better the air links are, the higher the demand is. The problem is that regional area aviation is really a terrible business. The passenger volumes are low, it costs you more to buy the aircraft because you're not buying in bulk, so you have to charge more, which means the low-cost carriers can undercut you. You can always be hit by shocks like fuel, recessions. You're running 20 flights a day. On every flight, there's going to be somebody who's not happy. If you don't handle those complaints correctly, they tell all their friends on social media that the airline stinks, and then so you've got very little margin for error on the service side. The kind of people that want to run regional airlines are usually the kind of people that just like aviation, which is exactly what you don't need in a CEO. A modern airline is a giant IT system. The IT system is complicated. You've got to always invest in it. Do I need to go on? Then there's the weather. Summary, don't start an airline. But then there's another perspective. So recently, my company has been very lucky to work with İlker Ayci, who was CEO of Turkish Airlines for 7 years and built it from a small European carrier to a top-ranked global giant. And we were advising another small government that had its national airline and had been told by some consultants to sort of kind of sell the airline, get rid of it. And İlker told the president of this country, he said, when I was appointed to the CEO job at Turkish Airlines, President Erdogan told me this: people's first impression of our country isn't when they step off the plane in Istanbul, it's when they step onto a Turkish Airlines flight. I want our airline to be superb. I want it to project the hospitality and values and show what modern Turkey is today, because then every passenger will assume that that's what the rest of the country's like, and they'll all want to come here and invest here and live here and so on. So the airline isn't just a bus service that you buy at the lowest cost. It's also your face to the outside world. So aviation is an example of an investment that is way too complicated, too expensive, too risky for the state to develop. But we will never get the airline that we want relying only on the private sector. They just can't deliver it. So the private sector can put planes, they can put expertise, they can even put most of the money. But only we can determine what the perfect airline is to serve the island and what the impact will be on the island plan and so on. Another area is hospitality. KPMG report says we have a limited choice of high-quality venues, and indeed the Isle of Man has no five-star hotel, which is perceived to be a problem for 20 years. Why not? They don't make any money. When you're next driving from Heathrow into London in your limousine on your way to check into the Dorchester or Claridge's or wherever you normally stay, you'll pass by a couple of Travelodges and Premier Inns in Hammersmith. And you might well be smiling to yourself and thinking, well, I'm heading to more valuable accommodation, but you'd be wrong. By far the best hotels to own as a private sector owner are the ones that you pass on the motorway, Standard Travelodge or Premier Inn. Five-star hotels are a completely different animal. They employ a lot more staff. They're much more expensive to build and maintain. They have higher operating costs. They don't make much money. In fact, the only reason to own one is a bit like owning gold bars. The building itself has a value that will be sustained over time. So like the aviation business, this is another example of a project where if that's perceived to be a key element of the island's attractiveness to build this island plan, only local Manx investors or the state can take a long enough term view of the actual building to do one. And then you can get the private sector to put the rest of the money and the foreign operator will come and run it and it'll work. Which brings me to the MDC. I think the MDC is very interesting. Obviously, the MDC is now at a kind of an experimental stage with a very sort of narrowly defined mandate. And I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of sort of trial and error along the way. But this is a very interesting way to effectively stimulate private capital into complicated projects or projects where the returns on paper can't meet the private market returns. An excellent example of what an agency like this can achieve is PFR, the Polish National Investment Agency, which has used quite small amounts of money to stimulate private sector investment into all kinds of tricky projects like ski resorts and power plants and stuff that's kind of difficult to do. Plus, there's another element to this, which is that although the people that manage money internationally are a pretty cynical bunch, they will always take the call from the government agency. That's what gets their attention. So finally, I'd like to leave you with this thought. Economically, the Isle of Man is no longer some kind of offshore version of the northwest of England, indeed if it ever was. To quote that other famous economist, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, we aren't in Kansas anymore. The current strategy now imagines a further sort of divergence from the UK towards a higher income economy and a higher quality environment for Manx citizens. And timing in life is everything. The island's attractions are now aligning perfectly with the zeitgeist amongst younger people. Remote working, quality of life, avoiding isolation by being in a smaller community, conservation of the biosphere, and so on. So the financial plan to deliver this has been sort of prepared by KPMG, it's been debated at length in public, it's been approved by Tynwald. But the key question is this: do we believe in it? Are we backing ourselves to do this thing? Earlier in my career, I was very lucky to work with a great entrepreneur in Poland, Jan Weschert. Jan built the leading media group in Central Europe from scratch to a multi-billion euro enterprise. And back then, Poland was a pretty wild environment. The governments changed every 5 minutes, and the currency, the Polish zloty, was sort of all over the place. And the consultants were always telling Jan, hedge your risk. Go make an investment in the US, put some of the company's money into US dollars or whatever. And he always refused. And one time I asked him about this, and Jan gave me this piece of advice. Do you believe in your own country? Because if you do believe in your own country, you have to bet on it. Gryphon.